Hello, my name's Janet Grauberg, and I am one of the facilitators for today's session. And I'm joined by Gabriel Eichsteller and Claire Baker, who are going to be contributing and helping with the tech and presenting today. And just a few bits of housekeeping. So you should have heard as you came in that Gabriel is recording. And we will share the recording, but only the bits where we're speaking in plenary, not the breakouts. And we won't attribute anything that's in the chat. If you want to speak, you're in the sort of feedback from the breakouts, we'll be asking if you want to do that. That will be part of the recording, but the conversation in the breakouts will be private. And we're also going to share the slides from today with all of you, anyone who registered. So there are quite a lot of links and things in the slides, and they'll all be available to you when we send the slides on. And so this is one of a series of webinars on relational practice, funded by the wonderful people at the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and with the National Leaving Care Benchmarking Forum and TEMPRA, where Gabriel is from. And this is the second in 8 webinars to introduce to you some thinking and some resources about relational practice, largely but not wholly with young people leaving care. And so the sort of background to this idea is that we ran a peer learning program for local authorities and charities in 2023-24, and that was about trying to support those organizations in putting relational working into practice, because we knew that the evidence is strong, and that's going to be the focus of today, about the difference it makes. But we also know that actually it's quite hard to do in practice. It requires support for our staff and changes to our organisation. So we wanted to really have a practical process of supporting those organisations in relational working, and that peer learning program itself generated a lot of learning, some case studies, some really useful links, and we thought, good, we'll share all of those, and we'll create a nice website, and we'll put all those resources on there. And then on reflection, we thought, actually, putting resources on a website is about the least relational way that we could think of to offer those resources to you. So that's why we are holding this series of webinars, to have a conversation, to introduce you to the resources, to point you in the right direction, and to encourage you to use them and share them in any way. So there are 8 webinars. This is number 2. We'll post the links to booking and the links to the resources in the chat. But today we're just going to have a focus on what does the research tell us about the impact and importance of relationships. And so I'm going to hand over to Claire Baker, who is an expert in the field, and she's going to take us through that material. Claire.
Oh, brilliant. Great to see everyone today. And yeah, I feel really lucky to have had this bit of space to dig out and pull together some of the brilliant resources that are out there that support us in making the case for why relationships are so important in the work we do with our care experienced young people. And Janet told us, reminded us that webinar 1 that we held a couple of weeks ago, we started with, well, what do young people say about relationships? And as you'd imagine, they're absolutely clear, you know, the relationships in their life, and that can mean lots of different people, lots of different roles. The relationships our young people have matter really deeply to them, to the quality of their life and to their well-being. And few of us would disagree with that. But what we hear time and time again from young people is that those relationships they don't always feel they're prioritized. And those of us who work with care experienced young people, we can find, we come across blockers and barriers, and we can find sometimes putting relationships first difficult in the work we do. We don't always have the time, the capacity, or the permission to prioritize those relationships. So in the first webinar and in blog 1, that's what we started with, what young people say. And we looked at the Bright Spots research, these well-being indicators, which try to get us to shift the narrative and focus on what young people, young adults leaving care, are telling us makes life good. And just look at what jumps out. Relationships, so trust, having a person you trust, having people who've got your back, who encourage you, having emotional support. So do have a look at blog 1 and the webinar recording. And so in today, in webinar 2, we wanted to move to the wider evidence base, really, around what do we know, what is the research telling us about the impact and the importance of relationships. So if we just move on to the next section, as I said at the beginning, it's a dream really to have a project like the Relationships Project, and I've had the time and space to have a good look around their freely available website. So I'm going to take you through some of the resources that this project has produced and pulled together. There's some really helpful definitions and glossaries on there, so we'll just look at this one together around relationship-centered practice, all about putting relationships first. Because when we do, it's about unlocking that potential and meeting needs by positioning meaningful and effective relationships as the first order goal, both as an end in itself and the means by which the other goals will be achieved. Goals like better health, stronger communities, stronger job satisfaction. And relationship-centered practice is determined as much by the environment and the organization protocols as by ourselves and our characteristics and the values we bring as the workforce, as practitioners, as people alongside those we're working with. And for relationship-centered practice to become more widespread and embedded, it does need to be intentional. We need that investment. And again, creating these webinars and this space for us to come together and look at some of these resources. And I start with this diagram from the Relationships Project, because it really has those different layers. So it helps us think about, well, what are the principles and the values behind this work? What are some of the behaviors we need to look to be enacting? What are some of the knowledge and skills? What are the organizational conditions? And I think that's really important. What can empower or obstruct working relationally? And then, of course, some of the external conditions. So in this short section, I'll just take you through some of those resources. So there's loads of great stuff on there. And as I said, you'll remember that layer about some of the relationship centered practice principles. And for me, when I look at these, things like kindness jumps out, trust, you know, we saw in the Bright Spots diagram, trust as the thing that marked relationships for care experienced young people, trust being two-way, you know, trusting social workers, trusting foster carers, being trusted yourself, children in care and care leavers really strongly telling us that. And, you know, I also really relate to vulnerability as well, and bringing ourselves to the work that we do. So I think diagrams like this and the explanations that go along with them can be really good conversation starters, prompts when we're looking at working more relationally. If we just look at the next one, again, there's lots of these type of resources. This is around behaviors, building in that regular reflection. Positivity, I'm looking at that one today, you know, trying to have that optimism and that view, that hope, meeting people where they're at and adapting, you know, flexibility, active listening. So if we just look at the next, in the relationships project, there's a resource called the Case Maker, and that has really kind of brought together everything around, well, I'll take you through what it says here. So the relationships project believes that everything works better when relationships are valued, people are happy, healthier, and businesses and services are more effective and efficient. And so the Case Maker assembles that evidence base for putting relationships first, describing why they matter, what great relationship-centered practice looks like. And it's got lots of facts in there, as well as stories as well. And if we looked at the next section, some of the facts are, I wrote down kind of irrefutable. You know, the sort of case for centering relationships is just really clear. And I just feel the relationships project can help us in whatever organization we're coming from about how we may be able to strengthen that case for relationships. So some of these statistics that you can read about in the poster around reoffending, so that the evidence there is really strong around when people are coming out of prison and they feel that they've been able to maintain those close contact with their family members, you know, there's really much more positive outcomes around reoffending rates, you know, right through to things like cancer recovery, life expectancy. So there's a lot of useful statistics in there. And alongside that, if we just go to the next slide, there's a lot of other resources that you can work with in a relational way, which you would expect. So there's a map where you can put yourself on the map, your organization, and you can gravitate to others doing similar things or something completely different if you want to be inspired. So it's a way to sort of get people working in this space connected. There's the permissions game. This could form something you would do as part of team meetings, getting together, and there's all sorts of scenarios and prompts and starters and conversations you can have as a team to sort of interrogate where you are, how you would approach different questions and different scenarios. So that's quite a fun way of thinking together around where you are in terms of prioritizing relationships. And then, as I said, there's a whole range of kind of these stories of change, and I've just highlighted the Barking and Dagenham one around returning social care to its more radical relational roots. So we just wanted to, we used this project in the peer review program that Janet spoke about, so we just felt really excited. If you've not come across it, sign up. There's a mailing list. Dive in and have a look. It's continually evolving. And if we just moved on to the next section, you know, there's lots of things out there. And I was really, when I was trying to think about, well, what can we do in this session where we think about the impact and the importance of relationships? And I really loved this example from Changing Futures up in Northumbria. They're developing their evidence base. They're an organisation, a collection of people working together with those experiencing kind of multiple hardships, different disadvantages. And their work really starting from that idea that, you know, to get alongside people, we need to understand them. We can't just be assessing them. They've developed what they call the liberated method. And again, we'll share all these resources so you can dip in, you can connect with them. They've got this kind of model of 3R, 5P, which is basically the 3 rules that we need: staying legal, doing no harm, and together working towards what we want to work towards, led by the person you're working alongside. And these kind of principles, I really liked the one around decisions made in the work. I think we can hear quite a lot about personal advisors, for example, not always feeling empowered in what they do, so they don't have access easily to credit cards, they can't make decisions, you know, creative work. So a principle here about making decisions in the work and empowering workers as well, and pulling others in rather than referring people on. And that last one, I think would resonate, I'm sure, with everybody, or lots of us here, around the benefits of going at the right pace for people we're working alongside. So if we just move on to the last couple of slides. So this slide, so I kind of pulled together a couple of examples more generally, the Relationships Project and Changing Futures Northumbria, but the evidence base in relation to care experienced young people is very strong as well. So this resource, this slide here, when you receive the slides and you can click on any of the pictures, it will take you to the research review. So there's many studies that have collated evidence around relationships and the importance, looking at different aspects of relationships, such as friendships or partners, or the relationship young people have with their workers. And we can't summarize everything that's in all of those reviews, but what we can do is get them to you and encourage you to kind of jump in. And if we just look at the last slide for this section, for example, if you were to jump into the evidence-based summary from the What Works Centre, there's this really useful diagram. They've synthesized the evidence from multiple studies around what helps in relation to facilitating positive relationships. So you can see things there, the kind of key components: non-judgmental listening, guidance, that persistence, the practical support, you know, doing joint activities together. So, you know, 30 studies, the evidence base from that. So we'll leave it there as a kind of introduction overview to some of the resources we pulled together for our peer learning program, and that we wanted to share in a more relational way. There's the slides that will come to you, and then Gabriel, thank you, is showing us the blog. So hopefully the blog will take you through pretty much what I've said, probably more concisely, and it's got some embedded videos in there. So we just encourage you to, you know, take the time where you can, jump in, look at some of these resources, and we've put some ideas for actions that maybe you can do alongside colleagues to sort of use some of these resources. I'm going to hand back to colleagues now, and we're going to have a little bit of reflection time together.
Lovely. Thank you, Claire, and thank you for that overview of you know, the resources on why relationships are important more widely, and then specifically on care leavers. And as I say, when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on all the little pictures, and that will take you through the through to the links, and they're all on the blog. Posted the link in the chat. Good. So we're now going to have a bit of time to chat about all that. Gabriel is going to put us into breakout groups, and we're going to consider just a couple of questions. So this is just for you to reflect on what you've heard. What is the narrative in your organization for why investing in relationships leads to better outcomes? What is the case that you make, or the case that you hear when you are talking about why relationships matter and why we should invest in them? And then what could help you strengthen that more? So we're going to go into groups for 10 minutes or so, and then so please just have a good conversation with whoever's there about what is the narrative you're using in your organization and how that could be strengthened. I hope you had a good conversation, and some time to talk. Just wondered whether you might, if you're willing to share a couple of nuggets from your conversation, if you write yes in the chat, I will then come to you and ask just for a nugget or two. If there's anybody who's up for sharing. Grand. Lynn, you were the first to write yes. Thank you. Lots of yeses.
I said the age-old connection before correction one, but we also talked about time being an issue for a lot of us. You know, sometimes we only have our children for a short amount of time. I haven't written down the name of the person, but they said they only had 6 months to work with theirs. But if you can have longer, and also about relationship building, because we've had children's homes and supported accommodations, and so we said about building relationships with families so that post 18 they have got somewhere to go, or a network of people to go to and support them when they leave us.
Lovely, thank you. And I think Kim was the next yes.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, in our group, I think we were from all over with different roles: IRO, family group conference, virtual school, and myself, I'm from the youth participation team, so advocacy and youth voice. And we all felt that our organisations were actually really good on it. This is the baseline relationship-based work. But the thing that we felt, well, particularly me, actually, I mentioned, could strengthen more in our organisation in Brighton and Hove, is to have conversations as professionals when we don't get things right, or when relationship-based practice isn't the kind of core of what someone's experience is from the side of view of a young person or a family, that don't feel there's a relationship that's positive here. And so I think as an organisation we can get quite defensive of that. So for me, we could strengthen that by being more curious and then we went on to have a conversation about professionals having those relationship conversations safely, as well as with our families. Thanks.
Lovely, thank you. And then Leela.
Hi, yes. We had a good mixture of people and professionals within our group. So I spoke of, as an IRO, it's one of the things that I ask within reviews about the friendships and relationships of young people and the level of contact, because we know a high majority of young people who are in care currently do return back to either the family home or that family network. And actually, it's worth exploring that early rather than waiting for them to be post 16. We did have conversations about, you know, relationship is two-way and it needs to be built as well, and there's time to build that. We reflected on one of the slides that we showed of the 3 R's and the 3 P's, and one of them was about not time limited, and I know it's already been mentioned by another group about some of the services are time limited, but actually to build that relationship and to build a knowledge of the young person's history without having to ask them continuously with repeated, you know, new social worker after new social worker, well, tell me about why you're in care. We need to escape all that and actually get down to that relationship building, which takes time.
Takes time, yeah, thank you. And then the final yes was Vicky. Thank you.
Yeah, we were in a small but mighty group, and we had a chat about structures, I suppose, really, and commitment. So the fact there's a want from us as individuals, and a big awareness of those relationships being needed in the way that as practitioners or social workers we want to work, but do the structures we work within support that? And if there's a big changeover of staff for young people, I think what was spoke about before, you know, how is that managed for young people when their social worker changes, or when they're leaving care, what are those conversations like, and how do you keep those connections open for young people once they've reached 18 and onwards, so they still feel like they have someone to go to once they're over 18, so they don't feel like there's just no one there from pre-18. I think that was it for us.
Yeah, thank you. And that links in, actually, there was a yes from Claire about that particular issue of how to offer relational working when time is short. Claire, do you want to just nip in?
Yeah, I think I was just saying, because we do FGCs, that we're not there to do longer pieces of work. We might only meet with them once or twice. That something I think is really important is to be really authentic, and also to be really aware and conscious of our own social graces, so Burnham's social graces, and to be thinking about others' social graces, and to be kind of sometimes leaning into that. And I think that really builds authentic connections with young people.
Thank you. Well, we'll dig out a link to Burnham's social graces and see if we can put that in the material we send round. And a theme there, I think, about time and how that is the most precious resource we have, and we always feel it's short, but actually we can you think about how we use every opportunity to ask and to behave relationally. So we have 5 minutes of time, so I'd just like you to take 1 or 2 of those to reflect on your own about what action you might take as a result of today. Are you going to read something? Are you going to follow up some of those evidence? Are you going to talk to some of your colleagues about the things you've thought about? And then, because we're all short of time, how are you going to make sure you actually do that? Are you going to write a pink post-it note? I write pink post-it notes for things I really, really want to do. Are you going to send yourself an email? Are you going to put a calendar entry? So what action are you going to take, and how are you going to make sure you do it? So we just have a couple of minutes of quiet while we each reflect on that. Thank you. Some people are keep thinking if you haven't finished, and do make a reminder of somehow how you're going to make sure, because I do know that as soon as we get off the call, the world sweeps back in, and it's great to see people popping ideas in the chat. That's really helpful. So we've come to the end of today's session, because we like to keep it short as it's a lunchtime. But we have the rest of the program to look forward to. So the next two before Christmas, supporting interdependence, and we'll be looking at a social pedagogy model called the Relational Universe, which we found really helpful in the peer learning program that I mentioned. And then the last one before Christmas, being authentic, that was a topic that came up in our small group, using the 3Ps model, also a social pedagogy model. So a couple of models to help us think about, to build on what young people say about relationships and what the research says. Please do get in touch with any of us if you'd like to follow up with any of these, or if you have any resources you think we should be adding to our blogs or our lists. The link there for signing up for the new ones, and for the blogs, blogs 1, 2, and 3 are now on the website. Thank you to Gabriel for all the tech, and to Claire for all of the research, and to all of you for coming. Wishing you a good rest of the day, and hope to see you at the next few in the series. Thank you all.